Welcome to Wednesday's edition of COVID-19. There's been an alarming rebound in daily cases here, with authorities recording well over 700 new infections today. Now, against this backdrop, we also touch upon the presence of vaccine diplomacy here in this region and elsewhere across the world. We start now with the pandemic updates. So there's been a surge, an alarming surge here in cases in the country today.
Right, Sunny. Korea's daily caseload has spiked by around 200 infections from Tuesday, 731. That's the highest number in 97 days or over 3 months. And that also includes more than 700 domestic transmissions. And with that, the average in domestic cases in the past week stands at around 625. Now, after 2 days in the 500s, we are back to the 700s. So that happened in less than a week.
I see. Meanwhile, so I understand authorities here have pointed to the warm weather as one factor behind the rise in caseloads.
Right, Sunny. Data shows that especially last weekend, movement across the nation has risen by around 15%. So that is suggesting that citizens' attitude towards antivirus measures may have become more lax. And here's a health minister on the details.
35 million cases of movement were recorded last week in the metropolitan region, which is up 10.1% from the previous weekend, and 37 million in the non-metropolitan region, which is an on-week increase of 19%. This is similar to the activity we saw just before the third wave of the outbreak arrived in November.
That was a health ministry official, I should correct myself. Now, the government is also considering an adjustment of operating hours at various businesses in the capital region, which this Wednesday saw over 500 infections, with Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province with over 200 cases in just a day. And also, not a single location is safe from the virus right now. All districts having posted at least one case of the virus. And with that, Korea's total caseload stands at 111,419, and also 7 new fatalities were reported. Now, a positive development is that despite the rise in overall cases, the number of people in severe or critical condition is not rising accordingly. And also, officials say that the number of cluster infections at nursing homes and nursing hospitals has been on the decline ever since the vaccination program kicked off. And we had some 43,390 people who received either their first or second dose of vaccinations yesterday. And meanwhile, with just a week ago approved here in Korea, Johnson & Johnson's Janssen vaccine rollout has been temporarily halted in some countries around the world on the back of rare types of blood clottings that was reported by the U.S. drug regulator. We will have more details on that with our Easy One in a bit. But before that, let's take a look at the global figures here. The U.S. has hit 32 million cases in total, and Argentina has surpassed the total number of caseloads of Colombia with over 27,000 new infections. And now let's take a look at the countries with the highest daily increases. Here, the U.S. and Brazil, both more than 80,000 infections in just a day. And the place with the fastest rise in recent days here, India, over 185,000 infections reported in the span of 24 hours. Also, resurgences here in Turkey with almost 60,000 new cases. And the total number of infections around the globe stands at 138 million. And we're seeing a rise in both daily infections as well as fatalities, with over 13,000 COVID-19 related deaths in the past day. And those are the updates I have for now. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Soa, thank you for that. Staying on the international front, as Soa mentioned, authorities in the U.S. have suspended the rollout of Janssen vaccines amid reports of blood clots. And for more on this and other news, I have Ji Abby Lee here in the studio with me. Welcome, Ji.
Thanks, Sunny.
Right, then let's begin with the recent U.S. decision to put on hold vaccines by Johnson & Johnson's Janssen.
Let's do that. U.S. federal health agencies on Tuesday recommended pausing the use of Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine after 6 women under the age of 50 developed rare blood clots following the inoculation. The company said it would delay the rollout of the vaccine in Europe as well. This comes a week after regulators there said they were reviewing rare blood clots in 4 recipients of the shot in these states. Acting U.S. Food and Drug Administration Commissioner Janet Woodcock said the pause will not be for long and that this is aimed at buying time to give healthcare providers information on how to diagnose and treat the clots. Here's what a leading American healthcare expert had to say on this matter.
Quite frankly, it would be a tremendous loss to the world, forgetting just about the United States, if we were to lose both the J&J and AstraZeneca vaccine. And I think before people overreact and spin this out of control, we need to constantly think about the risks versus the benefits of everything we do.
Now, following this news, the U.S. military in Korea announced its decision today to put a hold on the one-shot COVID-19 vaccine. Early last month, U.S. Forces Korea received 9,700 doses of the Janssen vaccine and began to administer it immediately.
I see. Now, elsewhere, I hear the global health body has reiterated its opposition to vaccine passports.
That's right. So at least not when it comes to international travel. And this is probably not the news that travel enthusiasts like you and I have been hoping for. And in stark contrast to what some countries, for example, Israel, are doing. So let's take a listen to WHO spokesperson's remarks during Tuesday's briefing for the reasons.
We would not like to see vaccination of the vaccination passport as a requirement for entry or exit, because we're not certain that at this stage that the vaccine prevents transmission, and there are all those other questions, apart from the question of discrimination against people who are not able to have the vaccine for one reason or another.
Harris added there are other factors to consider. One concern she raised was the issue of discrimination against people who are not able to get vaccinated for one reason or another. In related news, the WHO now expects to review vaccines made in China, Sinopharm and Sinovac, for possible emergency use listing around the end of this month. There isn't much further information on this yet, and WHO's Harris said the UN Health Agency is requesting more data from Beijing.
I see. Back here on the local front, then authorities on Tuesday, back on Tuesday that would be, I believe, underscored the importance of COVID-19 prevention within the academic arena.
Yes, it's quite unfortunate. The Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters under the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency emphasized the need for safety at learning institutions. Korea's health authorities said there has been a slight uptick in the number of COVID-19 cases among students after schools reopened last month. What's more worrisome than the numbers are the fact that teachers and instructors are transmitting the virus in classroom settings. This is definitely not what parents want to see when their children are in school. In the city of Daejeon, a total of 97 cases originated from a single teacher who taught at 3 high schools and 3 cram schools. A similar cluster in the southern island of Jeju also led to a total of 31 infections. Health officials explained the main takeaway from these chain transmissions is that the patient should not have gone to school when he or she was experiencing symptoms such as fever and fatigue. Going forward, these are the recommendations to prevent further outbreaks at learning institutions.
Teachers at schools and private institutions, as well as the management staff, must frequently ventilate and disinfect the classrooms and instruct the students to follow prevention rules.
Since the new school year began last month, middle and high schools have reported more cases than elementary schools. That's all for me today.
All right, Chi. Thank you very much for that coverage. Right, neighboring Japan has been battling over 3,000 daily infections in recent days, with Osaka alone recording more than 1,000 cases this past Tuesday, and amid that is the presence of variants. For more on the situation there, I have Eddie Duan live on the line. Hello, Eddie.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Right, Eddie, to start with the COVID-19 situation in Japan, where authorities have claimed variants are further challenging containment efforts there.
Yes, as you said, Japan recorded over 3,000 cases of COVID-19 alone yesterday, and the epicenter of infection has shifted from Tokyo to Osaka. And Osaka alone recorded 1,000 cases. And yes, variants are increasing in Japan. And with last December, it only recorded 4% of cases, but now the variant account for 42% of overall confirmed cases.
Accordingly, I understand, Eddie, the public has been casting doubt on the government's handling of the pandemic.
Yes, there are mainly two criticisms against Suga administration. One is that the PCR tests has been increasing. The number has been increasing. However, it's been not sufficient enough to prevent fourth wave from the variants, which is increasing right now. And the second criticism is that the vaccination rollout has been slow. So this Monday, Japan started to vaccinating its elderly population with age of 65 or above. However, it's been slow, and Japan started vaccinating healthcare workers in February. However, only second doses.
Right, Eddie, I'm afraid we didn't hear what you said last. How many medical workers have been vaccinated there?
Oh, okay. So Japan started vaccinating its healthcare workers in February. However, only 7% of healthcare workers have received both doses.
I see. Right then, Eddie, also of much concern is Japan's decision to release Fukushima wastewater into the Pacific Ocean, despite opposition from its own fishing community and its neighboring countries. Could you tell us a bit about this decision?
Yes, so Fukushima wastewater has been increasing, and by 2022 summer, it will be full. So Japan has to release the water, but Japan will process the water through advanced liquid processing system (LPS), which will make the wastewater under globally accepted nuclear safety standards, and the International Atomic Energy Agency have expressed support, saying that Japan's chosen water disposal method is both technically feasible and in line with international practice. However, as you said, China and Korea particularly expressed strong regrets, and concerns remain with misinformation.
Right. Meanwhile, Eddie, we are counting 100 days to the start of the Tokyo Olympics. How are preparations on that front coming along, Eddie?
So today it's 21st day since the torch relay started in Japan, and it's currently the runners are in Osaka, but with no audience around. And this week, Kyodo News poll showed that 72% of public are still support the cancellation or postpone of the Olympic Games, given the increase of COVID-19 cases and variants. So the government's issue would remain convincing the public to host the Olympics.
One final question, Eddie. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga and U.S. President Joe Biden are poised to meet later this week in Washington. What appears to be on their agenda?
Yes, so it will be Biden's first meeting with foreign leaders, and expected topics will be mainly about the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. This is important as China continues to human rights crime against Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and also aggressive attitude in South China Sea. And also others topic could include vaccine rollout and abduction issues as such. And we should take a close look at how Biden and Suga approach to Korean-Japan relationship, as well as it would be important for this era.
Right. All right, Eddie, thank you very much for making the time to be with us at this hour.
All right, thank you so much.
Right, back here in Korea, social distancing, movement restrictions, and the need to stay fit amid the pandemic are fueling fresh interest in interactive virtual exercise experiences. To take a look.
In March, some 30 students from a high school soccer team tested positive for COVID-19. On the other hand, though, doing less exercise because of the current situation has been emerged as another problem to tackle. In fact, a domestic survey showed that children gained an average of 4 kilograms during the period when they were unable to go to school.
생활체육 기관들이 상당 기간 이제 클로즈 됐었고 또 단체 모임을 많이 줄여들이다 보니까 이런 야외 활동을 줄이게 됐고 따라서 집안 생활이 늘면서 먹는 시간이 많아져서
Quarantine measures have caused an unexpected outcome, obesity. And now to solve the problem, a new way of enjoying sports has emerged.
ICT technologies are playing a crucial role in overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic, and the sports industry is no exception. At here, people can enjoy sports using some immersive media and VR technologies, which would allow them to have some unique experiences.
환경적, 공간적 제약 없이 스포츠를 안전하고 즐겁게 체험할 수 있는 공간으로 조성이 된 실내 스포츠 공간이고요. 최첨단 ICT 기술을 체험해 볼 수 있는 인터랙티브 스포츠 4종, 실감형 컨텐츠를 체험해 볼 수 있는 MR 스포츠 6종으로 총 실내 컨텐츠는 10종으로 구성이 되어 있습니다. 손세정제를 이용을 하시고 체험을 하실 수 있도록 그렇게 안내를 도와드리고 있고요. 체험 후에는 저희가 방역을 매회 저희가 30분간 소독기를 통해서 기기와 장비들 그리고 손이 많이 닿는 곳에 집중적으로 방역 소독을 진행을 하고 있습니다.
At here, people can enjoy various sports under virtual experts' guidance without any worry about infection.
I just tried some VR exercises myself, and if you look at the floor, there are some foot-shaped icons where you can stand on it, and it is a sensor that scans your move while working out. And once your workout is done, it gives you your physical abilities data, such as muscle endurance and flexibility on the screen, where you can easily check what you're good at or what you're lack of without the help of an expert.
Those badminton lovers can play with AI players alone. AI detects the shuttlecock that players hit, then it shoots out another shuttlecock.
이제 왼쪽이랑 오른쪽이랑 동시에 나오면서 이제 신체적인 운동도 되고 이제 뭐 나오려다가 안 나오는 그런 모션도 있어서 도움이 됐던 것 같아요.
다른 사람들과 시간 약속을 잡거나 아니면 다른 사람을 맞춰주거나 해야 되는데 요즘은 사람들끼리 만나는 것 자체가 사실은 어려운 분위기인데 타격 같은 경우를 조금 더 응용을 해서 개발하면 가족들끼리 다 같이 할 수 있는 게임이 될 수 있을 것 같기도 하고.
Not only does it give ordinary citizens the experience of cutting-edge sports technology, but it also serves as a testbed for sports companies.
공원을 찾으시는 많은 분들께 상당한 홍보 효과가 있고 또 이쪽에 오셔가지고 스포츠 시설이나 제품을 직접 체험해 보시면서 기업들께 직접 이제 뭐 의견이나 피드백들을 많이 주시고 계시고.
Aside from infectious diseases, weather conditions are critical in outdoor activities, but in virtual reality, weather conditions don't matter at all. In fact, over in Belgium, a virtual cycle race was held. Elementary schools in South Korea have implemented virtual PE classes to promote students' physical activities.
The COVID-19 pandemic is isolating us from one another, but this makes us to see some cutting-edge technologies introduced in our daily lives much earlier than previously expected. Well, it is unfortunate that we cannot play sports with others in real life, though. These VR technologies got us to enjoy sports in some new ways. This has been 신세벽.
This not only leaves the world's most vulnerable people at risk, it's also short-sighted and self-defeating. Vaccine nationalism will only prolong the pandemic.
中方将在力所能及的范围内，继续同各方开展疫苗合作，帮助国际社会早日战胜疫情。
CoronaVac de la empresa china Sinovac ya recibió autorización de uso de emergencia.
COVID-19 vaccines are emerging as tools for diplomacy amid the pandemic, with some countries using them to enhance their engagements with their counterparts, while others choose to place priority on the home front. For more on this, I have Professor Min Jung-hoon from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Welcome to the program, Professor Min.
My pleasure.
And I also have Professor Chu Jae-woo from Kyunghee University. Good to see you again, Professor Chu.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Right then, Professor Min, let's begin with the general perception of vaccine diplomacy within the international arena.
Well, basically, I think the international community perceives that the COVID vaccines are the most important key to getting out of the pandemic situation, and therefore all the countries want to secure enough the vaccines for their own people. But as you know, we have witnessed unequal situations for vaccine distribution, that the relatively small number of the developed and rich countries preoccupied most of the vaccines, and the many developing and poor countries couldn't. So the developing and poor countries had no choice but to watch many of their people suffering and dying in terms of the coronavirus. And China and Russia are conducting active the vaccine diplomacy, and they are offering their vaccines to Latin American and African countries. But in the past, such kind of a task was led by the United States, but this time it didn't. As you know, the Trump administration failed to cope with the coronavirus in its territory, and over 500,000 US people died in terms of the virus, sadly. So US could not afford to offer the vaccines to other countries and had to focus on taking vaccinations for its own people. In contrast, China succeeded in controlling for the coronavirus in its territory and offering its vaccines to over about the 50 states, and Russia also offered its own vaccines to over 20 states. So as a result of the vaccine diplomacy, I think China and possibly Russia enhanced its image as a responsible world power to the international community. And vaccines can go with its price, like the political and economic deals with the recipient countries. So there is no free ticket and free meal in the international community.
Right. Keeping in mind what Professor Min has just said, Professor Chu, so as he said, China and Russia appear to be the front runners in the vaccine diplomacy race. They're reaching out to Latin America and Africa. What do you suppose is fueling their strategy?
It could be politically motivated as well as medically intended purposes there. That's for sure. I mean, politically motivated because although Professor Min just mentioned about the goodwill and good gestures by these countries, but you know, goodwill like these is not without intention. And the intention is obviously to expand its influence and to boost its national image and so forth. But at the same time, if you look at it from the one former communist state and current communist state, they're driven by the so-called internationalism. Internationalism is once you achieve your own revolution success, then whatever you have excessive, and then you like to share with others. I think there's a political motivation there too, and the distribution of the vaccine is not coming free of charge. That's for sure. If you look at it, the recent cases of China making deals with Turkey and some other countries, they're all based on commercial contracts. They're not distributing for free. So, and medically intended purposes, I see it as because you know Chinese vaccine when it came out out really fast, within 3 months of after the outbreak of the COVID situation, and then people wonder if there was a sufficient a clinical trial by China, and see, people were really skeptical about it, and they're really skeptical about the sufficiency and the efficacy of the vaccine produced by China. And obviously the efficacy rate has not been up to the par yet. So probably that's where they see that China might have medically intended purposes of distributing these vaccines in the beginning.
Right. Now, for a broader look at the diplomatic matters in light of COVID-19 vaccines, I have Professor Mark Shanahan at the University of Reading live on the line. Pleasure to have you with us, Professor Shanahan.
Pleasure to be with you.
Professor, let's begin then with the recent spat between the UK and the EU over the export of COVID-19 vaccines. What is the latest on that front?
Probably an uneasy truce at the moment. Britain, or the United Kingdom, having come out of the European Union, was free to make its own deals with the vaccine manufacturers and took a punt on several vaccines while they were still in development. Got a very good deal with AstraZeneca. Of course, in the UK, we call it the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, and it was this idea of a UK developed and made vaccine, but also did deals with Pfizer and Moderna, among others, so that as soon as the vaccines were cleared for use, there was a rollout of a vaccination programme in the UK much faster than the European Union. So the 27 remaining countries of the European Union had banded together in a central procurement unit to purchase vaccines from the suppliers and just were not so quick off the mark. They didn't get such a good deal. So then when the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, was looking over at the UK and seeing things happening so much quicker in the UK, that raised the tensions considerably. There was a strong feeling that there were many hundreds of thousands of doses being exported from the EU to the UK, but none travelling in the other direction. So we got to a point in March where it looked as though exports from the EU to the UK would be halted completely. And there had to be a lot of background diplomacy going on to diffuse the situation and bring the two sides together. As it happens, neither the UK nor the EU can operate a vaccine rollout or even vaccine production without the other. So we have to work together. And of course, there is no point having vaccine nationalism just in the UK and getting everybody vaccinated over here. This is a global problem, clearly. And it only works, the vaccine only works as a programme if it is happening all across the world. And the UK and the EU are beginning to realise that now.
Right. Professor Shannon, briefly speaking, do tell us a bit more about tangible cases of vaccine diplomacy in Europe.
Well, particularly you would look for this block of 27 operating together. It's not wholly like that. We've already got cases where Hungary, Slovakia, and I believe soon to be the Czech Republic, all doing deals with Russia for the Sputnik vaccine. We've got Serbia just outside the EU offering Sputnik vaccinations as well to EU citizens. There are plenty of people from Germany, for instance, heading to Belgrade to get their jab. And equally, when people can get across to the UK, I'm sure there will be people coming over here to take advantage of the fact that the UK bought many more doses than it can use. Most of those will go into the COVAX programme, but equally, some will be available to our European neighbours.
Right. Professor Shanahan, do you believe vaccine diplomacy is emerging as a new frontier in international relations? And if that is the case, how should Europe look to respond?
Yes, it is. And it's very transactional at the moment. Europe, the European Union operates as a bloc. It wants to be seen as one of the great global trading blocs. If it has vaccines as a tool to compete with China, potentially compete with the US, and to stave off any risk of Russia, as your previous speaker was saying, growing their international presence, then that's what the EU will do. It wants to be seen as a good global citizen, certainly putting many millions of doses of vaccine into the COVAX programme for less developed countries. But it hasn't got its own house in order yet. The rollout for vaccinations across the European Union is still at under 20%. Compare that to the UK with nearly 60%. of citizens having had a dose. We're down to people in the 40s getting a dose over here. The EU was slow to get involved. It was slow to understand just the huge scale of the problem it faced. Now it has to speed up and get wise if it's to be seen as a good global player.
I see. All right, Professor Shannon, thank you for being with us live at this very early hour at your end.
Thank you.
Right then, Professor Min. Earlier this month, the US State Department tapped Gail Smith. I believe she was a former Obama administration official who geared the country's response to the Ebola crisis. Now, she has been charged with the task of coordinating COVID-19 vaccine diplomacy efforts for the US. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, basically, I think that the Biden administration want to restore the global leadership and want to take that kind of the position to the vaccine diplomacy. Unlike the President Trump, who got the America First foreign policy, as you know, the current Biden administration wanted to reactivate the diplomacy to restore the global leadership. So to do that, as you mentioned, the Biden administration appointed the coordinator of the global COVID response and health security at the State Department, Gail Smith, and I think she will be in charge of dealing with the U.S. vaccine diplomacy. And I also think that the U.S. will work together with its democratic allies and partners for vaccine diplomacy. For example, in the Quad Summit last month, the U.S., Australia, India, and Japan, they agreed to take more the active roles for providing COVID vaccines to the world community. So I think U.S. is reactivating its diplomacy to restore its global leadership, and the vaccine diplomacy will be one of the important early tests for the Biden administration.
Right. Professor Min, I'll ask you more about the Quad later on, but first, Professor Chiu,
Yes.
what has been the response from countries on the receiving end of Chinese and Russian vaccines?
I don't think they're too happy with it because surprisingly, if you look at Indonesian case, I think they were one of the first recipients of the Chinese vaccine last year. I think it was around the summertime or early fall. However, since then, I think the delivery has not been on time, and there has been sporadic, delays, and I don't think they're satisfied with the, efficacy of the vaccine as heralded by the Chinese side. Obviously, the efficacy rate in Indonesia is 84%. I think that was the latest official data coming from the Chinese government, but since then they haven't released any information yet. But if you look at the time span since the last summer or fall, the dosage rate per population in Indonesia is only standing at 5.5%. So that's been very low. So I think it's very telling, how insufficient that China has been with this so-called vaccine diplomacy.
Right. Now, earlier this year, India itself launched a humanitarian initiative to provide vaccines to countries in need under the so-called Vaccine Maitri or Vaccine Friendship Initiative. Now, as of last week, India has shipped some 65 million doses that will be to 85 countries, and of these, roughly 11 million were gifted to 45 nations. For more on this, I have Professor Sirikant Kondapalli at the Jawaharlal Nehru University live on the line. Hello, Professor Kondapalli.
Good afternoon to you all.
Professor, let's start then with the public vaccination status in India and its recent decision to temporarily halt the exports of AstraZeneca vaccines.
Well, as you know, the Indian side has infections increasing. A second wave has taken over. As you mentioned in the beginning, there were over 150,000 new cases that have been erupted. Last September was the peak, and we thought that the COVID-19 is waning, but it has now emerged this month once again. So we have a number of cases that have been reported. So out of the total of 700 odd million cases across the globe, we have nearly 10% of these reported in India. So the situation is pretty bad, and hence there has been a rethinking in terms of the export of the doses of vaccine to different countries. As you mentioned, India has already supplied to over 90 countries some 65 million doses of vaccine. 10 million has been given on grant, 35 million at commercial rates. And let me stress here, commercial rates meaning about $3.3 per dose. That is about 3,700 Korean won, as against the Sinovac or other vaccines which are coming at around $70 to $80 per dose. So India supplies these at $3.3 in the commercial ranges of 35 million doses that it has supplied. In addition, out of nearly 34 million COVAX initiative by the United Nations, it had supplied 18 million. So Professor Min should be noting that half of the COVAX initiative by the UN has been, nearly half has been donated by India. So this suggests that it's not just Russia and China which are exporting a lot of vaccines. India has. And the reason being that India has been supplying 60% of global vaccines. And India has been the pharmacy of the world because we have generic drugs at a very cheaper rates. And the production capacity in many of these, for instance, Serum Institute produces nearly 100 million doses a month. And they wanted to ramp it up by about 200 to 300 million doses. So far, about 106 million doses have been given to Indians in the first dose, and the second dose after 4 to 6 weeks will be administered. Presumably, we will be able to stabilize after this vaccination. Over 260 million people have been tested, and that represents just about 1/4 of the population because we have over 1.27 billion people. So that's a Herculean task, but India has been trying its best. When we had just about 600 cases last year before the lockdown, there were many attempts to produce these, and there is an domestic vaccine that is being supplied, produced. There are several startups which have come up. There is also the Russian Sputnik, which is supposed to be given regulatory clearances by India soon. We also have the AstraZeneca, which has been modified in the Indian conditions, manufactured. So as you mentioned, there is also the Quad meeting last month on March 12th. They have suggested to about 1 billion vaccines to be produced this year alone with the American technology, Japanese finance, Australian distribution, but manufacturing in India. So we would possibly will see this 1 billion vaccines to be distributed. Regardless of the situation in India, India is committed to exporting these vaccines, maybe in lesser numbers than compared to 65 million doses supplied. But possibly with the ramping up of the production, we will see more Indian vaccines available, possibly to South Korea as well in future.
I see. Professor Kondapalli, a very quick question then. Some pundits claim that India's vaccine initiative seeks to keep in check China's vaccine diplomacy. How do you respond?
Well, it is true that there is a subtle competition between China and India. As you know that the virus originated in Wuhan, and the first cases of virus came into India from the 3 students coming from Wuhan in Kerala state, which has now doubling up its infections. So there is the Indian anger or negative response to China because while its propaganda says that it has controlled, but before January 23rd last year lockdown of Wuhan, according to the Wuhan mayor, 5 million people have gone away from Wuhan. So there is the culpability of China in regard to the COVID-19 spread. But what India is trying to do is, of course, export of these. So there is, as you rightly said, there is some competition, but this is not very explicit. What India took was immediately organize an emergency relief fund for the SAARC countries, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, because India's focus is mainly in the neighborhood, and much of these vaccines are also have been to the South Asian countries, and then subsequently to the Indian Ocean, as well as Southeast Asian countries. So the emergency relief fund that Prime Minister Modi announced last March is about $10 million. This can be utilized by any South Asian country. There is a rapid response team that has been formed. There is now air ambulances that have been put in service. There is, in G20 meeting in April last year, Prime Minister Modi mentioned about the public good, global good, which is also repeated in the Quad Summit meeting, that we need to take care of the global community. And there is a Sanskrit word that has been mentioned, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is, the whole world is one family. And so the Indian consideration is geared up for this, that if there are infections outside, the infections will infect India as well because of the globalization process, which it indeed, as the first viruses from Wuhan, not just in India, but also the patient 31 Shincheonji church case in South Korea, or Yokohama, or other places, or in Thailand, where the first case has been reported last January. So this suggests that India has, of course, been contributing, and a decision was taken in 2004-2005 when the tsunami erupted. India suggested that it will also use its hard power to for the global good purposes.
Right. All right, Professor Kandapalli, thank you very much for your thoughts and for your time. Right then, back here in the studio, Professor Chu, let's touch upon the Quad vaccine initiatives that were mentioned by both Professor Min and Professor Kandapalli. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, at the summit, obviously, in the joint statement, they came to a consensus that they would emphasize on the vaccine diplomacy and COVID cooperation and so forth, which is good. And I think they came up with a concrete plan, and I think the plan was released a couple of days ago, saying that the Quad nations would like to distribute 1 billion doses of COVID vaccines to ASEAN countries, which are 10 Southeast Asian states. And I think, just like I mentioned earlier, you know, any kind of goodwill is not without intention, and obviously, you know, the selection is a reflection of your preferences. And Quad is basically based on geographical terms that, you know, expands from Indo-Pacific to Indian Ocean to Pacific region. So obviously, and the ASEAN is centered in the middle of the region, and that's why I think they're concentrating on this region.
Right. Meanwhile, Professor Min, what is your outlook on the impact of vaccine diplomacy on the structure of international order post-pandemic?
Well, basically, as I mentioned earlier, the program, vaccine diplomacy can contribute to the improving a little bit China's global standing as a responsible for the power to the international community. But I don't think that the vaccine diplomacy by itself can significantly affect the reshaping the international order after the COVID-19. It's because there are so many factors that can affect the reshaping the international order, like the changes in soft power, hard power among major countries and others. And I think that the vaccine diplomacy can take it's a small portion in the realm of soft power. So instead, I think that how successfully the Biden administration will restore its global leadership through rebuilding trust among its allies and partners, and how successfully it will manage U.S.-China relations, and how successfully it will secure its relative advantages in the strategic competition with China. These factors altogether will significantly affect how the international order will be reshaped after the COVID-19 world.
Right. Professor, in a rather surprise move, China recently acknowledged that the efficacy of its vaccine is not very high. What are the implications of this acknowledgement?
I think it's a reflection of the, release reports based on the, outside China cases, just like I mentioned earlier, Indonesia and some other countries and regions like Brazil and so forth. I think they cannot any longer deny the fact of the results coming from these countries. And I think there's a strong connection between, it reflects that there's a strong connection between the two institutes in two countries, the United States and China. I think Mr. Redfield has a good personal connection in the Chinese counterpart.
Right. And very briefly speaking, Professor Min, how can Korea seek to balance the procurement of vaccines and the art of diplomacy amid the pandemic?
Well, first, I think that COVID vaccines are very important to getting out of the COVID situation and coping with the post-COVID world. So South Korea needs to make sure that it will secure herd immunity in its own territory through the vaccinations as scheduled. And I also think that South Korea also needed to take more active roles in the international community joint efforts to cope with the pandemic all over the world.
Right. Professor Min, thank you for your thoughts. And Professor Chu, as always, thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Given the growing number of untraceable COVID-19 infections in recent days, authorities are urging members of the public to seek testing should you believe that you may have been exposed to the virus. Thank you for watching.